We have a major report to discuss today as a huge move is incoming for the Toronto Maple Leafs as Elliotte Friedman dropped a bit of a bomb revealing that the Leafs and Jake McCabe have had serious discussions surrounding a contract. So to break down the exact report and discuss what a contract may look like for the Leafs players. Stay tuned for all that on this episode. But before we do, if you're part of the 71% that aren't subscribed to the channel, make sure to hit that button. We are less than 100 subscribers away from 12,000. And the best part is subscribing is free and it means the world to Darius and myself as we produce the daily Leafs content for you all. It would mean the world if you hit that button. But Darius, let's dive right into it today. We have a lot to go over and a very, very interesting. Obviously, we've been talking about Nick Robertson. We've been talking about Mitch Marner, different PTOs, but we haven't spoke about Jake McCabe, and Elliotte Friedman kind of came out and revealed a bit of a bomb here surrounding contract extension talks. And he basically said that the Leafs have had discussions already about extending defenseman Jake McCabe. We know earlier on in the offseason they just extended Timothy Liljegren, much to some of the fans, including myself, dismay because of the amount of money that he's getting at $3 million a year. But this is a super interesting player and one that we haven't discussed this offseason. So I'm kind of excited to discuss it here. What are your thoughts on this? We're going to dive into the full report and all the kind of numbers that could go with it. But Jake McCabe, it seems like the Leafs and Jake McCabe could be coming to an extension here. I'm not sure about before the season, but at some point soon.
Yeah, at some point soon. I would imagine during the season this might get done. I don't think it's gonna, they're not gonna wait until free agency, and I think it has to get done. I think they want to get it done. It's just a matter of what the number looks like, obviously the AAV and the term in the contract, right? But I think that they have to get this done. Personally, I love Jake McCabe. I think he's fantastic. Ever since they got him, I loved that trade. I thought it was fantastic. And him and Benoit alike. We've been on the Benoit train since last year. So obviously I love this player, right? And I think he is a crucial part of the Leafs blue line. And he brings something that not every defenseman that they have brings, and that's the physicality, even for his size. And he was lighting guys up last year and he can move the puck. He's underrated offensively too, I think. So he's a big part of the Leafs lineup. And I mean, he's still relatively young. He's only 30 years old. And he's in his prime right now, and I think he's playing some good hockey. So I think they should get this done probably sooner rather than later. Him and Matthew Knies are kind of, lurking in the shadows right now in terms of contract extensions. When's that going to happen? When do we start talking about that? So I'm glad that they're starting to talk about it, at least because it should get done probably sooner rather than later. And obviously, if you look at his contract right now, Chicago retained half, right? So he's making a very low amount right now in the Toronto Maple Leafs. Like, it's a steal. It's a bargain, really. So he's probably going to get maybe not a significant raise, but he's going to get a raise. So that's another thing to keep an eye on too, with Matthew Knies needing a contract extension. And of course, what happens with John Tavares and Mitch Marner. So there's a lot at play with that. But he deserves it, I think, and he's definitely going to get a raise. I don't think it's going to be too significant, but something to look out for next year too, because it's not going to be what he's making now.
Yeah, a lot of pending, obviously, extensions that are in the works and that need to be done, whether it's Mitch Marner or whether it's even Nick Robertson, who's probably going to end up not playing for the Maple Leafs. But it's good that they're starting with a guy like Jake McCabe. And you mentioned a few things there. You can see this from Nick Barden saying, I believe they've had some conversation with Jake McCabe about extending him. We obviously know that the Leafs reportedly spoken with the 30-year-old defenseman about remaining in Toronto after the upcoming season. It's a 4-year, $16 million deal that he signed with Chicago back in 2021, so 3 years ago. But like you mentioned, because they traded for him, Chicago retained a lot of that, a very, very good deal. And maybe part of the reason that they were so comfortable giving Timothy Liljegren the amount of money they were. And again, McCabe has been a very good defenseman for the Leafs. He played 94 games at Toronto, scoring 9 goals and 24 assists while averaging 20 minutes a game. And he had 219 hits last season, second most in the team behind guess who? Simon Benoit, and the third most ice time average among defenders in the club. So again, TJ Brodie's gone now, so he's going to be a guy who plays every single game, plays 20 minutes, maybe even a little bit more now in the absence of TJ Brodie. That being said, they obviously got guys like Chris Tanev and OEL, so maybe his time on the ice goes down a little bit depending on how they fit in. But he's a player that has just been very good for the Leafs the whole time that he's been here. And again, 28 points in 73 games. Points don't really matter that much for defensemen, but even then, he still put up a good amount of points. He is turning 31, so age is going to be a factor here. But, the Leafs haven't shied away from anything regarding age when it comes to their defensemen this offseason, Chris Tanev and OEL. And he said, I think it's perfect for them. I think he's exactly the kind of player they need. I don't know where this is going to go, but I do believe they've had some conversations about extending McCabe, and we'll see. And I agree with Elliotte here. Friedman says he's a perfect fit. Like you just mentioned, he is a perfect fit for this team. And, again, he just helps. You got to retain assets like this, even if they are aging 2 or 3 years. He probably has 2 or 3 years left in his, not prime, but being an effective NHL or maybe a little bit longer. And if they're trying to win a cup now over the next handful of seasons, keep him.
And like you mentioned, I love that you brought up TJ Brody because I feel like for Sheldon Keefe, obviously different coach now, but with the dynamic of the defense and the coach at the time, TJ Brody was used a lot in different situations and trusted a lot. And I feel like McCabe's going to kind of take that role on now. Not the number one guy, but maybe a third guy, obviously behind like Tanev and Riley, because Riley, I think, is still the guy on the blue line. But he's going to take that mantle now as, he's going to get more ice time, right? He's going to be relied upon more in certain situations. And I think he can handle it. I do trust him. I think he's a great defenseman. And I think he needs to be, pushed into that area more because I feel like he's really useful for the Leafs in that way. And I think, trust goes a long way. And I think he's a Berube type player too. Again, like I mentioned, the physicality, just the way he plays the game. I think he's a pretty smart player too. So I liked how they fixed the blue line around him. So hopefully he'll be able to shine a little bit more this year with some good supporting cast. Obviously, I talked about Riley. I think he's going to have a great year too because he's going to have Tanev beside him. So he's going to be able to be unlocked a little bit. And I feel like with what we saw last year with McCabe and Benoit, where it's only going to be better this year. I feel like if they can keep that dynamic and the good vibes going, it's only going to be better because they have a better supporting cast behind them with that third pairing as well. So it's going to be fun to watch. I think he's underrated offensively too. Obviously, not the best defender ever or anything like that, but I think for where the Leafs are, he's someone that they should lock up, and obviously not an 8-year deal or anything like that. But it's something that I think they should get done pretty soon.
Yeah, it's important at this point for the Leafs to lock up guys that are at least effective blue liners because we've seen how bad, or not how bad a blue line can be, but how important a blue line is not only for the regular season. The Leafs aren't worried about that, but in the playoffs as well. We saw their lack of depth last year. They made obviously a few, I guess, interesting trades at the deadline. The Edmondson, who ended up being fine, Labushkin, who ended up being not great, and it ultimately cost them in the series against the Boston Bruins, among other things. Of course, the defense wasn't actually that bad in the playoffs, but the offense was very, very rough. But yeah, you mentioned the TJ Brody thing. I think he could replace what he did, especially from a mental standpoint. Obviously, Sheldon Keefe relied a ton on TJ Brody last year. You mentioned Craig Berube is now stepping in, and I'm sure that these conversations that are being had are in cohorts with Craig Berube and, of course, Brad Treliving regarding who they want to keep, whether that's from the Mitch Marner front, the Nick Robertson front, in this case, the Jake McCabe front. Not the best defensive defenseman, but he also he is exactly what kind of the Leafs need. No one too crazy. They already have Chris Tanev. They already have Morgan Riley. So I'm kind of all in on this guy, and I'm happy that the Leafs are kind of having discussions because, quite frankly, I don't think that Elliotte Friedman would have said this unless he was hinting at something coming. We've seen him do this before, and obviously it's a name that hasn't been brought up. This is the first report about it, at least that we've covered here. So it's going to be very interesting to see, and maybe we'll see a Jake McCabe extension very soon. Probably, like you mentioned, not before the season, but at some point over the handful of weeks or months here. Just get it done before he's a free agent, and then move on to the more important players like Mitch Marner.
Yeah, I would suspect that it's going to come down during the season, I think, at some point, because you don't want it to get to free agency. And I think like to let a player like this walk, if you're the Leafs, doesn't make sense. He fits into the team perfectly. What he brings to the team is something that you need more of. And honestly, I think like just the way he plays and carries himself, obviously, we don't know what happens behind the scenes. He's not, in the forefront of the behind the scenes videos or the blueprint or anything like that. But based on the way he plays, like I could see him wearing an A at some point too, right? Maybe in a couple years, or maybe even at this point, because they're rejigging their entire captaincy or captains, I guess I should say, and assistant captains. But yeah, I love this player, and I think they should get it done sooner rather than later. And it'll probably come down and get done before Matthew Nyes, I think, because they're tidying some stuff up. Obviously, they got Joseph Woll done, so I think this would be probably the next order of business.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting to see. We'll obviously keep you up to date with that. Let us know, do you want to see McCabe extended? And leave in the comments at what number. How much do you want to see him make a year? But that'll wrap it up. If you're enjoying the channel, make sure to hit the subscribe button. We're super close to 12,000. So make sure to do that. We'll see you tomorrow.